Well, this way of using Docker and Podman is obviously not the main intended way, but how much of it
Yeah.
was fairly straightforward to get done with something with this Distrobox project, and how much was it of like you had to kind of break some stuff that shouldn't have really worked the
Bend
way it should?
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think all the volume part is, the straightforward way. Volume and environment variables are pretty much straightforward. It's when I started Docker, yeah, sorry, Distrobox. When I started Distrobox, it was, I think, a couple of hundred lines long only,
Mhm.
everything. And it was pretty much create with a bunch of volumes hard coded, and the enter was pretty much like a for loop over your mvars, so that it appends the mvars and then enter, which it's not that different now.
Mhm.
I mean, it's still pretty much that.
Mhm.
um, Obviously, expanding the use cases, we find that, I don't know how to actually enter what command to execute when you enter the container is actually important. So uh, having, for example, in cases of, I think it was a fix just now in the 1.7 about the when you have an initful container with, for example, systemd,
Mhm.
you actually want to do a proper login, so it can give you a login session, so it acts more like a real thing.
Right.
That like let's say it's halfway between what you expect from a normal container and what you expect from an LXC, for example,
Mhm.
which acts a little bit more like a VM for you, but it's still a container, right?
Right.
So yeah, it's that part was a little bit bending what is advisable to do with these container managers. But I mean, if you can,
Well, the whole just running like tons of applications inside of a container like this is kind of like not the way that it's typically intended to be used. Like most of the time when people are talking about running Docker, they're talking about running Nginx in a Docker container and then or like Jitsi in a Docker container. It's usually not like, you know, because if you install something like if you have like an Ubuntu container with Distrobox, you might install like 10 or 20 different applications with that, sending all of those applications out of the box, and it's just it's a really different way of working with these containers that I would imagine has caused some kind of headaches along the way trying to work out specific problems.
mm, less than you think,
Okay.
to be honest. Yeah, what Docker and Podman are by default are application containers. So think of it like a Flatpak, but for service. So you actually just run, I don't know, Nginx, and that's it. I'll just run, I don't know, kubectl, and that's it, just that. But in the end, it's just a Linux userland,
Mhm.
so you can actually do what you need. Many containers, like proper ones, only expose one thing. For example, I don't know, the port of one service, but they are running 3 or 4 processes inside for, I don't know, they depend, the service depends on
Right.
those.
Right.
So it's not a new concept at all.
Mhm.
Uh, but I'd say we are with this box and other solution for pet containers like those, which we can talk about later. It's more like an halfway. As I was saying, between let's call it a userland container, so your whole userland, and a system container with which LXC or LXDR, in
Mhm.
which you have a container of a whole system. So it's a little bit different from Docker and Podman.
Mhm.
But I mean, it's the technology is the same. It's
Right.
just what you do with that. The technology underneath LXC is the same as underneath Docker.
Mhm.
I think Docker, when it started, actually was using LXC under the hood, like the first year it was released or something like that before Containerd. So it's the technology is always the same. So it's not reinventing the wheel.
Right. One of the things I find really cool about Docker is not there's just this neat little Docker Distrobox. I'm gonna keep doing this. I'm sure you're gonna
probably.
Maybe I should just start saying Podman. We'll just forget that Docker exists because I won't mix up Distrobox and Podman. With Distrobox, one of the things I find really, really cool is not that it's just this nice little thing to manage a bunch of tightly integrated containers, but you also have this ability to export applications from the container and just basically treat it like it's just an application on your system. Obviously, there are weird caveats with that with GUI applications. I know on Arch, for example, I had to... There's like a specific thing. You've got it in the like FAQ there to... It's like, I think it doesn't pass in the display or something. I don't remember the exact details. You probably had to report the issue.
Magic cookie.
Yeah.
It's, some systems don't have a magic cookie by default. Like GNOME and KDE for sure does in run, user, whatever. So you can use that magic cookie to have your X authentication working.
Yeah.
But for, I don't know, homemade systems like, a window manager and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was on AwesomeWM
you have to manually... Yeah, so you have to manually do the X out thing or it won't work.
Yeah, but I find it really cool that you can just export the applications and treat them as if they're just a regular part of your system. And that, I think, is what makes it really, really useful, especially if you just don't want to deal with, like, you want to get it set up and then you just don't want to look at the fact there's a container there. And I get it that some people would want to use it like that, right? Like, it is kind of complicated to have a system in a system, and once you get something set up, you probably just want it to be easily accessible and just there. Obviously, there is that caveat as well where the first time the container opens up when you boot your system, it's going to take a while to do so. But besides that, once it's already running, it just works. That's awesome.